Thank you for downloading Dalton and Tomich's webinar, which will discuss the process of leaving the United Methodist Church denomination. My name is Emily Traster, and today I have Dan Dalton here to discuss how he has helped churches leave the denomination and keep their property. Dan, why don't you start off with giving us an overview of what's currently happening within the church?
Thanks, Emily. It's great to be here. Currently, the United Methodist Church is just in a huge amount of disarray. There are local churches that are leaving, churches that are closing, pastors leaving, members leaving, laity leaving. It's just really a disaster in terms of what's happening within the denomination. This all started probably about 40 years ago in terms of the issues, but it came to a head in 2019 at the General Conference in St. Louis, when at that point in time, the Council of Bishops thought they would arrange a special General Conference just to handle the issues within the denomination. They thought they had the votes that would allow the conference to change the rules within the Book of Discipline that would be more in conformity of what the Council of Bishops wanted, and that is a more liberal denomination. However, they didn't count on the conservatives showing up and voting in force to uphold the Book of Discipline. This threw their plan in complete disarray. In addition to that, the Taylor Disaffiliation Plan, a plan to allow churches to leave the denomination, was voted on and approved at that denominational meeting. This is the only plan within the Book of Discipline that allows a church to leave. The United Methodist Church is kind of like the Hotel California song. You can join, but you can't leave. But the Taylor Disaffiliation Plan allowed a church to leave. Subsequent to that, though, the bishops have said, we're not going to follow the Taylor Disaffiliation Plan because we think there's improper voting. And when they took that to the Judicial Council, the council couldn't make a decision on it because they provide no proof of the improper voting. So where we're at today is the bishops simply don't uphold the Taylor Disaffiliation Plan in most conferences. Some they do, but most they don't. And we are in a process of, if you want to leave, you either have to negotiate a resolution or you have to litigate that particular claim. There is a separation protocol, however, that was adopted back in January of 2020. And at that time, 5 affinity groups got together, and this was not an officially sanctioned group, but it was 5 leaders of 5 different parts of the church. And they agreed that the church could no longer stand on its own. It couldn't be one in unity anymore. So they created a plan that was to be adopted in May of 2020 at the General Conference that would allow churches to leave and separate from the denomination. And 2 new denominations would be formed, a more conservative denomination and a more progressive denomination. And the United Methodist Church would remain. COVID hit, though. The General Conference was adjourned, and now it's rescheduled for September of 2021. But at this point, we really don't know if that conference is going to happen. We still have COVID raging, but more importantly, the United States is not issuing visas in foreign countries. And the bulk of the delegates to the General Conference are from foreign countries. So we can't get the delegates here in time for the General Conference, and that's a real concern. We don't know if it's going to be virtual or not. What we do know is a lot of people just don't trust the institution of the United Methodist Church, thinking that they'll manipulate technology so that their voices won't be heard. So a virtual conference may be off as well. What we do know is it's just a large degree of dysfunction within the United Methodist Church, and that's where we're at today.
How should local churches prepare for the impending division of the denomination?
Really, the local church should do a number of things, but the very first thing the local church should do is the leaders need to meet and they need to figure out, where does this local church want to end up at the end when the Methodist denomination implodes? Whether it's going to be in September of 2021 or before that time or after that time. There's a number of different paths a local church can take. You can become independent. You can be on your own. And that's a path that a number of churches are doing right now. Because if your plan is to be independent, there really is no reason right now to stay within the denomination. There's too many uncertain variables in terms of what's going to happen at the General Conference, or if there's going to be a General Conference, or if the separation protocol will be passed in the present form, or even if the Judicial Council is going to uphold it as constitutional. Those are all giant questions that remain at this point in time. So if you're going to be independent, now might be the time to really start focusing on getting yourself ready to go and actually doing it. The other path is joining a more conservative or progressive denomination that's going to be created out of the United Methodist Church. So the local church needs to decide where the laity fits within this whole process. Or the third part is just joining a complete new denomination. There's been a whole branch of denominations that have come out of Wesleyanism and out of the Church of England ultimately. And so you can join or align with one of those branches as well. But the leaders really must first decide where the local church is going to end up a year from now. The second step is the local church needs to decide, is their pastor on board with them? There was a study done in 2011 by Towers and Watson of the United Methodist Church, and it really showed the gigantic gulf and divide between what clergy are thinking and what laity are thinking within the United Methodist Church. By and large, clergy is much more liberal than the denomination, and laity is much more conservative than the clergy and the denomination itself. So you really need to figure out, is this pastor on board with us when we're leaving? Or do we have to start thinking about hiring a new pastor at the end of the day? And once that's done, then the next step is to talk to your congregation in a congregational meeting. Just get the family together and talk to them and say, hey, this is what the leaders have decided. This is what we're looking at in terms of our denomination. This is where the pastor's at. We're recommending that we're going to go one of three routes: independent, join a denomination, or join another entity as well, or just do nothing and stay within the United Methodist Church. There's all those options that need to be discussed. But more importantly, have those discussions internally. You do not involve your district superintendent. Don't involve your bishop. These are just local matters for you to decide. Unfortunately, there are a number of bishops out there that are quite punitive. And the moment they hear that a local church is thinking about leaving, they'll close the church through processes within the Book of Discipline under Section 2549C, which is the exigent circumstances part of the book. So those three things are things that the local churches can do right now. And once they figure out where they're going to go, then take those next steps that are appropriate within the determination of where they're going to end up.
What can churches expect from working with our law firm?
Well, we're a pretty unique law firm. We don't do normal law. We don't do divorces. We don't do bankruptcies. We don't do criminal law. We don't do car accidents. Those are really the four main areas that law firms work in across the United States. We focus on religious property, which is land use and zoning. We do a lot of land use and zoning for religious institutions across the United States, and denominational splits or religious property disputes. That's, local churches leaving denominations, or a split within a local church over the ownership of local church property as well. So what you can expect from our law firm is a firm that has decades of experience in this particular area of the law all across the United States. In the last 2 years alone, we've helped a little bit more than 40 local churches leave the Methodist denomination. And we're working with dozens more right now in December of 2020, going through this process. We anticipate working with many more in 2021 as well. You'll be working with a firm that will serve as your guide through the process. We know Methodist polity, we know the Book of Discipline, we know the Judicial Council decisions, we know state law in terms of how they handle religious property disputes, and every state is different in this particular area, which is kind of unique in this area of the law. We work in this every day, all day long. So you're going to be working with folks that specialize in this area of law, that's going to have your interest in hand, that just work with local churches. It's all we do. We don't work with the conferences. And we're going to help guide you through this process so you can disaffiliate, keep your property, keep your pastor if you want to, and hopefully you'll grow your ministry at the end of this. The remarkable thing of this is that churches who have left have seen an exponential growth after they've left the Methodist denomination, every single one, all throughout the United States. We can help you with that.
What can churches expect from the conference?
Well, each conference is different. And as you know, the Council of Bishops, which are all the bishops throughout the United States, is just hopelessly dysfunctional. They don't get along. They don't like each other. They don't talk to each other. They don't have the same standards. They don't agree on anything. So depending on what conference you're in, and it really, again, it depends on what state, what conference you're in, uh, you're going to have a different expectation from the conference. In some conferences that we worked with, they're very amicable, where we'll talk to the conference chancellor, which is their attorney, and we will come up with a parameters of negotiations to separate from the United Methodist Church. And those typically, we try to negotiate those between ourselves. And if we hit an impasse, then we go to mediation, where we hire a retired judge or an attorney that's experienced in the law, that doesn't have a dog in this fight and can basically bring the parties together to resolve a dispute. And by that, what I'm talking about mediation, I'm talking about the price that you, the local church, will pay to avoid litigation. That is to settle all claims at the conferences, so you don't have to litigate the matter, but you keep your property. You're not going to pay fair market value for your property. You're not going to pay all the other costs that the conference wants. But that's what that's what you can expect in a lot of conferences throughout the United States. There are other conferences that simply don't care and are going to use what I call the Episcopal burn all bridges approach. During the Episcopal litigation, the Episcopal Church decided that any local church could leave. The members could take the Bibles, and that's it. They had to leave and get out of their property, and they just litigated the heck out of those cases. Yeah, they have a lot of resources, financial resources to do so. In fact, I think the Episcopal Church at last count has spent almost $47 million just to preserve their property. And they lose a lot, but they keep on doing it. They've taken this approach, taking the punitive approach against local churches who buy land, who build buildings, who maintain buildings, who support their dioceses and their conferences, and they just try to take what they have. There's a number of bishops out there and a number of conferences that take that approach. They think it's in their best interest to take your property, your land, your buildings, your funds, your money, everything that you've done. They think they're entitled to it, even though they've contributed absolutely nothing to the local church. We work with those conferences and those bishops. We know how to handle those issues. It's a more lengthy process, but we help those local churches get through this process time and time again, and we can help your local church with that as well. So from a conference, again, it depends on where you're at. We have experience with most conferences throughout the United States, so we can give you an idea of what you can expect moving forward from the conference. But in general, either they're going to be amicable, in which they are in most parts, or they're just going to scorch the earth, which some do. And we can give you that information in terms of how they work when you retain us, and tell us which conference you're in.
All right, what are the 3 things churches should do now?
Number one, meetings. The very first thing you should do is that, like we talked earlier, is your leaders need to meet, figure out where the church is going to go, then meet with the pastor, figure out what he or she's going to do, and then meet with the congregation and recommend a direction for the church. So have those informal meetings on your own, without your district superintendent, without your bishop knowing, to figure out the future of that church. So that's the very first thing. The second thing is members. Figure out who your members are. There's pastoral math, and then there's math. And if the pastors out there are watching this, you know what that pastoral math is. Anybody who walks by your door and breathes, you consider a member. That's not a member. A member of the United Methodist Church is very clear in terms of who a member is. And it's also clear who a member is not. So now's the time to clean up those membership rolls. The Book of Discipline provides 4 ways of making sure that somebody is not a member: death, withdrawal, through not 2 years of not being around, or through a judicial process internally with the United Methodist Church. So make sure that you figure out who the members are, because ultimately they're going to have to vote on the actions you're taking. And then the third thing is documents. Gather your documents together, because we're going to need them to review them, to figure out where you're at right now, to give you a guide in terms of where to go future. On our website, we have a link to a checklist or a guide in terms of what documents you need. But in general, what we need is governing documents, which is your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, your constitution, membership requirements, things like that. You may not have them if you're an older church. A lot of churches never incorporated, but if you do have them, we need them. The second is property records. So the deeds to your property, leases for your property, any type of mineral rights that you have on your property, anything related to your property, we need that information. And if you don't have it, that's okay. We can run title through a local title agency to get it, or you can go to your register of deeds in your county and find that information. And then the third thing is financial information. We need to know, do you have debt? So we'll need to look at your mortgages. We need to look at your loans. We need to look at your endowments, your trusts, your investment vehicles to see how they're titled. Your banking information, your checking and savings information as well. We need to know that the ownership of that and how they're titled as well. Those three things, gathering up those three sets of documents is vitally important because we're going to need it moving forward. We're going to ask you for that along with some other things as well, just to give you an idea of what you own and how to move forward. And again, we're going to be working with you hand in hand in this process because we're going to be working off the information you provide to us. And then you might remember later on that you have other information. There might be additional property that you own that you forgot about. We'll add that into it as well. But those are those three things: your meetings, your memberships, and your documents. Those are the three things you can do right now to get yourself ready to go through this process.
All right, finally, Dan, why is it important that churches act now?
You know, it is so important that you act right now because we just don't know where the denomination is going to end up in September of 2021. If you are going to be an independent church, there's no reason to wait. Just go now. You're probably losing members. Your pastors are probably looking for other jobs. If you have an opening, it's probably just almost impossible to find a new pastor because clergy don't want to join the United Methodist denomination because they don't know where it's going to end up. So if you are hemorrhaging members and leaders and donations are down and people are upset with the denomination and your leadership, your pastor, and your church wants to become independent, now's the time to do it. Now's the time to get yourself ready to go and depart from that denomination. You're not going to do any better. In fact, you'll probably do much worse if you wait for the parameters that will be decided or may be decided at the General Conference in 2021. If you're going to stay in the denomination, you also need to act. You need to make sure that your governing documents are in place. You need to make sure that you take steps to protect yourself in the future, whether it's an agreement to retain your pastor or have control over selecting your clergy members, or an agreement to limit apportionments, because those are going to go way up. The church is hemorrhaging cash right now all across the country. So you can negotiate with the conference on those points. And you want to have an exit plan negotiated as well if you're going to stay within the conference, just in case things go south. That happened in the Presbyterian USA denomination, and the conferences are following the Presbyterian path, and I can see it happening again. So if you're staying in the denomination, you need to act now as well. And if you want to leave the denomination and you want to go to the new progressive denomination or conservative denomination or another denomination that's out there, your governing documents need to be in place. Your deeds need to be in place. Your property records, your mortgages, your debt instruments, your investments, all of that needs to be adjusted and taken in place just to avoid any issues down the road with the conference. You don't want to find yourself leaving and then 10 years later finding that the United Methodist Church still has a property interest or a right to your property because the trust clause was not discharged properly, or their name is on a bank account or investment account or in an endowment, for example. Take the time now to fix these issues and to resolve these matters. You've got the time, and you know we're heading toward a resolution, hopefully in September 21. Don't wait till it's too late. Now's the time to act.
Dan, thank you so much for your time. And if you're watching this webinar and have more questions or want to work with us, please do not hesitate to give us a call or email us, and I'll be happy to set up time for you to connect with Dan. So thanks again, and we hope you found this information helpful.